Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is a privilege to rise in this House, as it is every time. And I'd like to just start out, if I could, just to give a quick congratulations to both my son and daughter who made it on to Speech Fest at their school. So they obviously got that oratory ability from their mother, not from me. But so congratulations to James and Maggie. But of course, the substance of today's debate is the Budget Implementation Act. I will be focusing on an area that particularly affects my riding of Northumberland Clark, and that is the Alto high speed. I have, in my speech will mostly just be a direct purveyance of the comments that I have received from my riding with respect to the potential impact of the expropriation and the abridgment of the private property rights of many of the property owners along the route. And so just so that people understand, so the idea of having a high-speed rail from Montreal to Quebec City to Ottawa and to Toronto, stopping in Peterborough, of course, the great city of Peterborough, I might add, is of course an encouraging thing. Like, that is a positive thing. That if you could make it from Ottawa to Toronto in 2 hours, that is a positive thing. But there are significant challenges, and I'll go through some of the concerns that some of my residents have raised. And number one is the impact it'll have on their property. So in some cases, there are individuals who have had farms that have been multiple generations, some going back as far as back to Confederation. They've owned the property, their families own the property, and that will end. Their property will be bisected in some cases, in many cases actually, by the proposed route. We still don't know what the final route is, and I will thank the Minister for being direct in saying that the final route will be announced before the end of this year. That is positive. But what is not positive is that the Minister, in my questioning him in committee, was not able to give any specific or concrete answers to questions such as, when will expropriation begin? How much notice will be given? So you can imagine yourself as one of the residents of Northumberland County, and you've owned this farm through multiple generations, and then you see in a bill that proposes to do it, within a year, they're going from where they own their property, where their families own their property for the last 150 years, to a point where it'll just become and be expropriated. The least the government could have done is to give a defined process to these individuals before announcing the potential expropriation of their property. This should have been announced all at once. And so that if people were aware, would be given notice, they would be given a process. The Minister repeated over and over that there would be common sense, it'd be common sense. Well, common sense isn't quite good enough for someone whose entire life, who's wrapped around, so anyone who lives in a rural community, and that's where I've lived my whole life. It might be the same in urban communities, but I know for a fact that in rural communities, you're very much defined by where the property you own, the dirt that's underneath your feet. And for someone to come and literally pull that rug from underneath you is a very scary proposition. In addition to that, for those folks who were not directly affected by that, the indirect impacts could be huge. And so, well, like I said, I completely agree that being able to jump on a high-speed train and going from Montreal to Toronto in 3 hours or whatever the time is exactly is positive. What is not positive is if you live north of the proposed route and you need to get to Northumberland Hospital, which is in the great city of Cobourg, your drive could have gone from a 30 or 40-minute drive to now 2 or 3 hours, because the Minister couldn't even tell me, and nor will Alto as of yet, where the crossings will be. So let me explain. So in my area, quite a few people live north of where the route is, but a lot of the infrastructure for those various communities, including the Northumberland Hills Hospital, including the Highway 401, including actually the VIA train, and of course that's the major route and linkage to the rest of the community. And so if you put basically a fence, a steel fence all the way along, and the Minister said, well, it's only 60 meters. Well, it's still 60 meters. And regardless, even if it was just 1 meter, the idea of bisecting a community so that instead of driving directly to that hospital when your child's got a fever or your dad's had a heart attack, you now have to drive an extra, we don't know, could be half an hour, could be an hour to the east or the west to get to the hospital, could literally mean the difference between life and death. And so that's at the very extreme, but there are also other inconveniences that people in my riding and much of rural Quebec and rural Ontario will have to deal with, such as there will be many instances where there are students on one side of the high-speed rail and there are schools on the other. And so now we've now extended bus rides. It could be from a 10-minute bus ride to an hour bus ride. And these are obviously a couple trips a day that we're now extending it. So, and then we also have our farmers who they might have their co-op, which is where lots of farmers get their seeds and they get their fertilizer, and then they have their fields on the other side. Once again, that can be really challenging because it's not always just you're driving your truck. You could be driving your combine or your tractor. How are you going to get around that? Are you going to drive? Anyone who's driven a combine or been behind one, they don't go particularly fast. So are you going to take an extra 2 or 3 hours in the middle of harvest when, for those of you who live in rural Canada, you'd get this, farmers will work around the clock during harvest season because they're at the mercy of Mother Nature in terms of when they can harvest this. And so it's admirable to save people from in Montreal and Toronto to get back and forth in a couple hours. It's anything but admirable to make rural students in Ontario and Quebec add hours to their day on buses. It's anything less than admirable to make Canada less able to feed ourselves because our farmers are less efficient because they have to drive hours and hours. And in some cases, their same fields will actually be bisected. And so they'll have to harvest one side and then find a crossing, which the minister wouldn't tell me. Is it an hour away? Is it 2 hours away? And we are reducing their ability to be successful, and we're reducing our ability to feed ourselves as Canadians. And so these are substantial challenges as we go forward and when we look at some of these issues. But I just want to read a couple of lines specifically with respect to some of these questions. So this is actually comments. These are comments from some of my residents who have emailed in or sent social media notes. It is extremely shocking to hear the minister speak in this manner, showing so little consideration and apparent lack of understanding of his own territory. Telling citizens to just go meet with Alto, with their citizens, is merely courtesy information sentence, where staff take notes and any real decision-making authority is not there. This is deeply frustrating. This is well put here, too. So the minister, in my questioning throughout kept putting it back on the residents, kept going, well, you go to Alto. Well, who's in charge here? I understand that the minister is ultimately in charge and that he should have the ultimate say. And so one of my residents actually sums it up very nicely when he said, why is it up to people who live in these affected areas to tell Alto which roads and amenities are essential? Should this not be part of their own research done in consultation with municipalities prior to choosing a route? I've attended the Alto sessions. They have no answers, only vague promises to do right by rural residents. I think the entire process is disingenuous and flawed. Another comment here. Thank you for this. If you have any opportunity to ask future questions, it would be important that Alto consults regarding the impacts of road severance and travel for emergency services after the route has been chosen so that townships and residents can provide more precise feedback. In the video, it sounds like they are simply relying on this phase of public consultations to tell them about that, when they hopefully will be doing extensive research into these matters before making decisions. So they go on and they talk about the various ways that this will affect people's lives. We understand, and like I said, it's admirable that we should be making life more convenient for the citizens of Toronto and Montreal, but let's not forget about the citizens of rural Quebec and rural Ontario.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Hamilton West, Ancaster Dundas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I really appreciate the comments from the member opposite, especially the general acknowledgement that high-speed rail is a positive thing for Canada as a nation-building exercise, as a transportation corridor, and as an economic building opportunity to use Canadian steel, Canadian labour, Canadian skilled trades. And I really take to heart his comments about the impacts on the communities that he represents. I've worked in construction for 20 years. I've been a part of the planning process at the municipal level. And really what it comes down to is building trust with communities in the proponent, and also that when there are mitigation measures that come forward, that they're actually going to be implemented and taken seriously. So my question to the member opposite is how can we help him make sure that that happens in his community? Thank you.
The honourable member for Northumberland Clark.
Thank you, and I thank the member for the sincere question. The number one thing that will defeat fear is information. And so what we've been lacking and what our residents have been lacking is information. We don't have concrete, we understand there are some commercial realities, but if you are threatening to potentially take away people's farms, which have been in their generations, been in generations for 4 or 5 generations, like I said, sometimes since Confederation, you owe it to that person to tell them when they will get notice, how much notice they will get, what potential compensation they will get. You owe it to people who live on either side of this rail, how they will get to the hospital, where those crossings will be, and that information is not there. Like I said, we just cannot forget about the people in rural Ontario and rural Quebec.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Shefford.
The honourable member for Shefford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What we see with C-15 is that this government has a tendency, and I've been looking at this omnibus bill and how it amends many laws. But in any case, on the topic of high-speed rail, as we heard about in my colleague's speech, it's disturbing that we're still talking about this when the Bloc Québécois brought forward seemingly simple amendments. For example, that way, if someone was the victim of property losses, they could build back, and it's mystifying to me. The same thing happened about limiting the ability of people to contest their losses, and the Liberals were supported by the Conservatives, which means that people can be expropriated during the high-speed rail project, and they don't have the same rights as other people who are expropriated in other infrastructure projects. So the Bloc Québécois brought forward very good amendments to try to improve this bill. Why did the Conservatives not recognize that?
Northumberland Clark.
Thank you once again for the excellent question from that member. And I can tell you, I'm happy to work with any member of this House who's able to help me protect the rights of our residents in our communities, our property rights that are so important.
And comments. The honourable member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington, Tyendinaga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, too, share a lot of the concerns that honourable member has spoken to, and I applaud him for his remarks in the House tonight. We have to remember we're in the House of the Common People, and if we, as opposition and government, are representing the views of our constituents, hundreds and thousands of contacts that I've had from my riding, which neighbours, the gentleman to my left, have similar concerns. If I could have the member speak to the economic realism, is this ever going to happen, number one, and number two, if it does, what is the cost? And when there's so much concern and disruption and fear of what's going on with the world right now and how much everything is costing, the troubles that people are having from day to day just to survive, how can this project necessarily be a priority for the government? Indeed, I respect and I support infrastructure and advancing infrastructure, but there's got to be some timing as to how and when and why this is happening right now.
The honourable member for Northumberland Clark.
At the outset of this proposal, the $90 billion price tag has been floated about. I very much doubt that that would be the end cost, and I think you would see substantial overruns. And then when you ask the government, what's the business case for that? Well, there is no business case, they actually say. And if you don't believe me, you can check media reports that said that the government actually now, we're 3/4 of the way down the tracks, as it were. They're actually hiring a bunch of consultants to do a financial analysis. So they don't believe their own numbers either.